Mr. Voule. Thank you very much on behalf of the Geneva Academy for agreeing to this interview. This is very much a privilege for us that you're willing to address some of the questions produced by our students, the students of our LLM program in International Humanitarian and Human Rights Law. First things first, I would like to ask you a little bit about your background. So what were the defining factors in your career, your professional academic background that led to becoming a special rapporteur? And do you have any recommendations perhaps for prospective young lawyers in this regard?
Yes, thank you very much, Pavle, and for this opportunity to really talk about my mandate in general. And well, the defining points, you know, it's quite difficult to really say exactly when. But one thing that I must also say that is a long career in terms of promoting and protecting human rights on the ground, and starting from school. I must also say that yes, the class, yes, the study can give us kind of background, but I think that what is important is our commitment beyond what we are learning in school in terms of our engagement in different NGO in different area in terms of promoting and protecting. I started since the school when I was interested as an Amnesty International member in the school, distributing Amnesty International reports, meeting with my other colleagues, students, French students, and we formed a small group within our school too. And at that time, one of the focus Amnesty, it was the prison, private prison that are people that are arrested, and we call them it was an individual case of people that are deprived for their liberty. And we start for that, writing a letter, sending to the government to ask to free them and everything. And I start really understanding the really universality of human rights, the suffering, and beyond my own suffering, because I live also in a country where at that time it was a dictatorial regime. I can remember when we protest in school, just because our teachers was in a strike, and we are requesting government to take measure in order to fulfill their demands so they can come back. The police, you know, in the country I came from, Togo, the reaction of the police was really brutal against when we were in college. I mean, it was repression and all of those things. And so, I mean, this also built my understanding of the value of human rights, you know. And then I moved from that, continue my activism within the Amnesty. Before even I finished the university, I did a law. And then I continue engaging myself in the international and regional work in terms of advocacy at the African Commission. I became the expert member on the African Commission Working Group on the extractive industry. Before that, even I funded some regional organization with friends. To ensure that we continue this kind of fight, this kind of struggle for human rights. And I moved from them to come to the international level here. And I think I will say that one of the defining area, the defining moment really that I decided really to focus myself on the freedom of association and peaceful assembly is when I was coordinating the study of the African Commission on the laws that govern freedom of association and assembly in Africa. And from the information that we received, from also what I saw from the report, information and everything, it reminded me when I was also in my own country, how people are continuing to suffer because they cannot enjoy these fundamental freedoms, which are important for democracy, which are important for people to participate. What people is asking is to be able also to participate, to be able to contribute, to be also able to be the agent of development. So at that time, I reflect and I was saying that, well, I need also to really leverage my contribution at the state level where I can also contribute and ensure that many people, million people that are not able to enjoy these rights, many young people that are facing currently repression from what you can see today, Nigeria, Bangkok, and everything. What I faced also when I was young at that time. And I thought that I need also to be able also to be their voice at the international, to ensure that states understand the value of this right, the importance of them to really recognize this right, to guarantee this right, because it helps young people today to be part of the decision-making, to also say what they want about climate change, what they see as important, what they want about their future. Without these rights, we wouldn't be able to listen to them. So then at that time I decided, and God making things, when this position opened, I applied, and based on my background and the work that I did before, the Human Rights Council trusts me and appointed me as a special rapporteur.
Thank you very much. Coming from a country which I think faces similar issues, I come from Serbia. I can very much relate with a lot of what you said. So now taking this for some further development, and starting from your focus very early on the freedoms of peaceful assembly and association. So how if we look at the international legal framework, so how well developed would you say it is? Is the current legal framework adequate to ensure this right? Do you think there might be something that we ought to expand, or something that maybe it's more of an issue of implementation in your view?
Well, I think looking at the international framework, I think the international framework is quite rich and solid in terms of the protection of this fundamental freedom, peaceful assembly and association. If you look at the Article 21 and Article 22, both 21 protecting the peaceful assembly, and Article 22 also freedom of association, you see that some of these both articles, they are also replicated a little bit at the regional level. At the African Charter, you have it also, many provision. At the Inter-American system, you have also Europe, you have also. So you can see that all of these two fundamental freedom, they are quite the same protection that have meaning that these rights are important. People need to express themselves. These rights are important for also civil society, but also trade unions. If you look at the international covenant and economic and social rights, it also provides clearly that this right is important also. In Article 8, it also provides that this right is important. Freedom of association is important for the trade union, for people to organize themselves to define, to also protect their interests. If you look also at many ILO conventions also, this right is recognized in the ILO convention. So we have, I must say that we have very developed and well-developed international framework for that. And today, adding to this, recently the Human Rights Committee, which is the committee that monitors the implementation of international covenant and civil and political rights. The Human Rights Committee recently developed what we call the General Commentary 7, which now really lay down and clarify the content of the Article 21, which is peaceful assembly. And if you add all of this, I think we have tools at the international level to say that this right is protected. And add to that also most of the Constitution. Today, most of the Constitution, most of the Constitution, I can probably few that you will see doesn't have clarity, but most of the Constitution also protect this right. So the question like you ask, why these fundamental freedoms are still under attack? Why they are not protected? Why people are not able to enjoy this fundamental freedom? That's the problem. The question of the implementation comes there. The question of the willingness, the question of the commitment of states to implement it. You see, this right is seen in many cases as political right. And it's seen also by many governments as the right that is in the core of power. You allow people to enjoy their right to association. You allow people to be able to protest. And many governments feel like they allow their opposition. They allow dissident opinion. It's clear that the covenant also said that this right is fundamental for democracy. It's also fundamental for people, for minorities, people that have dissenting opinion. That's how democracy should play. And it's the core of democracy. These two rights, they are the cornerstone. You need, by enjoying these two freedoms, you are able also to protect other rights. If in a society where this fundamental freedom of peaceful assembly and association not protected, is it a society where you cannot talk about the democracy, you cannot talk about the rule of law, because the core of democracy is a people participation, is a people enjoy being able to contribute to the how you define their politics and how you shape their future. It's people able also to choose their own leaders through the mobilization. It's political party also being able also to compete, to run to the election, to also go to the supporters to sell the politics and their agenda for the future of the country. And if you have a country that is not, and you see this is a many challenge, that at the national level, the implementation is still a very challenge. Many countries, many constitutions, like I mentioned here, many constitutions provide that freedom of association and peaceful assembly is recognized and guaranteed by the constitution. But at the same time, if you look at the Turkey law, in Turkey you have a constitution that provides this right, but you have several legal framework that really restrict the enjoyment of these rights. Mm. In order to protest, you have to go through a very, very nightmare, very complex requirements. Many countries, people to protest, they have to go through processes. Mm-hmm. While we are saying that if these two rights are fundamental freedoms, then they don't need permission to be able to be enjoyed. But in some of countries still have the regime of authorization, while we are advocating for the regime of notification. Even some of the countries that have regime of notification, they put some barrier, saying that you need before you go to the street to demonstrate, you need permission. You need also to show through the request that this demonstration will not undermine the security. You need to show also that how many private security you have to protect you. You need also to have so many requirements that finally the right is no longer fundamental freedom, but is now subject to if the government wants or not. This is in very contradiction to the principle of human rights, principle that every human being should enjoy his fundamental freedom without being denied for any ground. I know, and then I want also, that there are some limitations. Mm-hmm. Yes, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights define narrowly some of these limitations. Yes, there is recognition of that. The Covenant recognizes that states may resort to some restriction based on national security, based on public health, or the rights of others. But it's also mentioned that this should be done in a way that those restrictions are necessary in a democratic society. They should serve the society. But what we are seeing today, from Turkey to Nigeria, to many places, Nicaragua, to Bangkok, is that some of these restrictions are only built on the ground that they protect those who are in power. Mm-hmm. So the whole protection, the whole enjoyment of this right is seen through the security lens, than to be seen like a fundamental freedom for people to enjoy. So these are some of the challenges that we are having today. And we have also many guidelines developed by the ODA, developed by African Commission, developed by many, that is there to help the states to understand better what they need to put in place at the national level in order for people to enjoy this right. But we are still facing this challenge. Political view and political context is always big challenge for the enjoyment of this right. And it depends on if the government is willing. Constitution is very beautiful. We have some constitution that provide this right, their fundamental freedom, but in reality, you have to go through very tough process in order to enjoy your own freedoms.
Indeed, thank you very much for this insight. I can see how the political perception of this, of assemblies, of gatherings, of protests, can be a specific problem, I think, which you have with these freedoms, which may not be so obvious with some other human rights. But now I also wanted to ask you, so as Special Rapporteur, you're basically, you have the capacity and you're in a position to highlight some specific issues and to bring attention to some specific matters. So I took a look at your reports from last year to the General Assembly and to the Human Rights Council, where you prioritized at that moment the issues of one, peaceful assembly and association and its link with equality, or rather inequality and poverty, where you basically said that the rights to peaceful assembly and association have both intrinsic and instrumental value to increase equality and eradicate poverty.
Yes.
So I would like to ask if maybe you would like to elaborate a little bit more on this, because the link seems to me quite fascinating, but maybe just to say a few more words about it. And also afterwards, just like some challenges on these rights in the digital age, which was also which was in your report to the Human Rights Council, please.
Yes, thank you, Pavle, for, I mean, just to start with an anecdote. I mean, I think this is a good question, because our reports, one of the tasks that we have is through our reports that we present to Human Rights Council to study trends, but also to make a recommendation on how we see how we think that the government should be implementing certain provision in order to further the enjoyment of this fundamental freedom. And the thematic report is a tool for us to really sometimes focus on one of the issues where we think that without the enjoyment of these rights, the government will not achieve certain results, you know. So one of the things that I did is, one of my report was focused on the enjoyment of these rights, or the need for the government to put in place a conducive environment in order to ensure that civil society can contribute to the implementation of SDGs. You know, I was talking about anecdotes. I remember I was in one of the country visits, and when I request the government, I put in my list, because during our country visits, we already send the list of the government to say we need to meet this kind of constituency we need. And then I say I want to visit communities, one of the community living in an area of the extractive industry. And the government told me, one of the ministers told me, well, why are you going to meet the communities? We thought that you coming here is to meet with political party. Meaning that the freedom of my mandate is seen as mandate for political party, which is wrong. You know, this perception also increased the fact that sometimes when government see me coming, they feel like I'm coming to discuss with their opponents. I'm coming to do it. Yes, political party is also within my mandate. Democracy and election also, they are within my mandate. There is a clear connection between the freedom of association, peaceful assembly, with political party, with participation. There is connection. But one thing that I'm trying to put in this report is to make sure that government understand two things. The first thing is that the enjoyment of the fundamental right is not a privilege. It's a necessary decision, political decision to further development and also to ensure the participation of community. The secondly is also to mention that if you want communities, civil society, to really participate to the implementation of one of your commitments, which is the SDG, Sustainable Agenda 2030. If you want them, then you need also to provide a space that is conducive for the communities and for civil society to participate to the implementation of this agenda. And the core element of the agenda 2013 is to ensure that no one is left behind. So if you want, the development should be understood at the same time, because the agenda is 2013 agenda is a human-centered agenda. It's the agenda that takes into account human being. So if you want people to be able also to be the agent of their development, you need to allow them to organize themselves. Because one of the things that we receive quite is sometimes that even community-based organizations that organize themselves, to fight against climate change, to fight against inequality, poverty. Sometimes those community-based organizations are threatened sometimes because many governments feel like they are, through their work, they try also to sensitize the community to understand better that they have the right to participate. They have the right also to ensure that their voice is understood. They have the right also to choose their leaders. But if you repress this, if you don't allow organization to be set up, if you don't allow this fundamental freedom to be enjoyed, what you are doing is that you don't allow this vibrant civil society to organize themselves to help the poorest. By putting this restriction, is not you feel like you are putting this restriction, for example, to undermine civil society. No, you are undermining those they serve. For example, those who are working to ensure that people have access to education. If you put the restriction, we saw it recently in Burundi, when the Burundi resorted to the restriction against international NGO. Those who suffer, it was those who do not have means to be educated. And we know that it increased poverty. It increased people being not able to go to school, even humanitarian NGOs, because they are not able to operate in the country because of restriction. They can assist communities. And how do you fight against inequality? By preventing those who are fighting against inequality to work. That's what I want to show in this agenda, that by creating this conducive environment, you make a best choice of development. And I want also to emphasize also for development agents. Well, the mix of development agents, including World Bank and many institutions, they feel always that everything that is about human rights is not their agenda. Their agenda is only development. But you can today separate development and conducive environment. We know many countries that collapse today because restrictive environment, because people are not able to operate, because you can fight against inequality without allowing civil society, without allowing those who fight that. So my message was particular that even if you work in the development sector, promoting a conducive environment, promoting the enjoyment of this fundamental freedom is the best way for you to achieve your result in terms of supporting the country. And the last thing that I want also to emphasize on this also is that, you know, it's quite common that people think that, okay, this right is a privilege for civil society. That is only civil society enjoying and everything. They don't see beyond what is have as an impact when civil society is not able to operate, when humanitarian organizations are not able to operate. And for me, my key message is that a conducive environment, an environment that allows citizens to organize themselves, to come together, also to be able to denounce a corruption, a project that is not viable project for the communities. Because through the protest, through the assembly, you are able also to denounce, to alert the government that this project that is implemented is not in line with what the community need. So you are encouraging, if you don't allow those things, you don't allow community to express themselves, you are encouraging corruption, you are encouraging also inequalities.
Thank you very much. I think that each of these points, we could organize just a conversation on any of them. So thank you very much. So we were only able now to scratch the surface a little bit, but this is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
But now I don't have many questions left, one or two, but my next question is something that under the circumstances I think was unavoidable. I would like to ask you a little bit about, the most recent developments globally. In particular about, the impact of the current pandemic on the freedoms of association and assembly, because it seems that these have been, well, if we look at the media, if we look at what's happening all around us with, limited gatherings and the requirement to take a distance, etc., all of these somehow, it seems from a layperson's perspective on this, that there has been quite an impact. So maybe would you comment a little bit on that?
Yes, on top of what we already know as a restriction that is happening, I highlight in many countries, repressive countries, with adoption of national security law, anti-terrorism law to curtail the enjoyment of this right. We also saw a new trend since the COVID-19 pandemic. Because when this pandemic was declared, one of the things that many governments did is to adopt emergency law, which is within their power under the international, because we have under the international law the possibility for governments to declare this. But one thing that we realize is that many governments enter in de facto emergency without declaring this to the relevant international body. Normally, you need to notify to the Secretary General that will notify that this is the right that I'm derogating. Some of them did. They notify in normal. But in overall, we saw the emergence of some tough measure against that curtail the enjoyment of freedom of assembly and also movement. In many countries, for example, we know many governments trying to mitigate the impact and they did well. But some governments use the COVID-19 as a pretext to pass certain laws that they may never pass if we are not in an emergency situation, to also curtail the enjoyment of the freedom, to forbidden and then also to restrict gathering. We saw in many countries, but also sometimes for the adoption of some of the sweeping emergency law, because sometimes those emergency law, they are not really aimed to fight against the pandemic. But sometimes if you look at them, we know recently in Hungary, for example, that the law was give more power to the executive than the parliament. I mean, in this kind of situation, you may say that the power should be given to the medical personnel. But at the same time, you see the government use this pandemic to reinforce its power, to rule with decree. Make government ruling with decree. And what we saw doing that is also that because most of these decisions do not enjoy public support, because there was no really meaningful consultation, in many parts, like India, like many countries in Africa, people do not accept this kind of confinement. They do not accept this. And one of the things that many governments did is the repression, putting police in the street to reinforce this with repression, to close it down. But one thing also that we saw is, okay, during this time, what's happened is that many governments then really taking the measure that respond to the threats, to the health threats, because this is what the covenant is saying, that if you want to restrict this right, the restriction should be targeting the threats exactly, not using the threats to undermine the enjoyment of the right. What many governments did is to impose those restrictions, to close certain area, and sometimes also to not allow access to certain area by the opposition member. We saw also in many countries the postponement of election. While, for example, the ruling party, for example, have access to all countries, continue to do their campaign, opposition need to go through different steps in order even to be able to meet with their supporters. In some cases, they are not able to do that when the ruling party. So you see that there is a lot of decisions that are taken at the same time, where we all agree that the government have the right to fight the pandemic, that we may give possible some of our freedom to allow this to fight, that this is used for other purpose than really fighting against the pandemic. And this is my very concern. And from that, we, since my mandate was seized by many of these concerns from Asia to Latin America to Europe here, I drafted what I call the 10 principles. And this 10 principles that I did was to interpret the international laws and obligations for the country. And one of the core of that is that the COVID-19 should not be used as a pretext to curtail the enjoyment of this right. While we recognize that states have the right to resort to certain restrictions to fight against the pandemic, these restrictions should be proportionate, it should be necessary, and it should aim to fight against these threats, not for other purpose, like what we are seeing, curtailing the political or postponing the election without any consultation. So we saw that COVID-19 today, and it's continuing to COVID-19 today, is becoming the threat, a big threat for the enjoyment of this fundamental right. But I must also recognize that many governments are trying their best to mitigate this and to do their best. Many governments that I acknowledge during Human Rights Council saying that what you are doing is very great, but unfortunately we have many governments that are using COVID-19 to build a repressive law in their country. And we saw the emergency also of this new authoritarian regime that trying to challenge democracy and say that democracy is not the best way to address COVID-19. What I'm saying that is wrong. If you want to address the COVID-19, you need people. You need people because they are the ones that are affected. You need them.
Well, you paint a very gray picture, I would say. You know, it's not all that bad, but there's definitely room for improvement, which gives me the hook for my last question to you on that improvement aspect. So what difference can human rights lawyers make? So is there something that we can do? Is there any purpose in being a human rights lawyer today? Obviously, you're the special rapporteur and a human rights lawyer. So I'm asking, you know, objectively, from your experience.
Well, from my experience, you know, is let me say that since 4 years, I don't want to point figures to anything. Since 4 to 5 years now, the international system is really under serious attack. And our legitimacy is questioned by many people, from the rising of the populism in many countries to also the kind of very unfriendly speech against any institution that promotes human rights. And those countries that we trust to continue to fight for the international value in terms of protecting human rights, for continue also to push for the recognition of this fundamental. Unfortunately, we saw that many leaders, because they have their own problem at home, use this as a pretext to challenge the international system, to caution the international system. And I think this is where the role of lawyers, international lawyers, is important. We need to continue to ensure also that the international system continues to survive, because this is what we have today. Imagine what can happen when people don't have access at the national level, access to justice. If they don't have any access to remedies at the national level, where people can turn to. The only way, if they don't have the international system, if they don't have the special rapporteur as a recourse, the only avenue for them is either to join the rebellion or to join the violence, to use the violence means. So we have to continue to build that. We have to continue also to articulate in a way that the international system can become more effective. The effectiveness is a challenge. And making sure that we, the government, understand the value, that the charter is built on that. How we can live all together. How human rights can be the basis of peace and security. Today, if I'm seeing some decision making or some talk to try, we cannot achieve security of all if we are not, if we don't remember that what brings us to the First World War, the Second World War, is the lack of protection of minorities, is the lack of the protection of people. And if we end by completely collapsing the international system, where those minorities can go, where people can access if they don't have national remedy. So we have the work to do that as international civil servants, as international lawyers. This is why I will invite also your students also that be interested, when you study this, trying to understand the suffering of people beyond Geneva. Many people, many things are happening today. Is it your future also? When it starts somewhere and you are not able to raise your voice, it will reach you one day. Thank you very much.
Mr. Voule, you give much food for thought. Thank you very much on behalf of the Geneva Academy, our director and our students, of course. This has been a fascinating interview, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And we will definitely do our part, I guess also the students in their future careers, to improve the situation in whatever way we can. Thank you very much.
I wish them all the best, and they are the future of this world, and they should really keep on. And this is really important subjects that I'm inviting them to be interested in, to learn more. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.